So, for some reason, a video I made almost 2 years ago for a school project has over 400 views, for God knows what reason. And just because I'm bored, I have decided to remaster that video with better audio and a slightly more in-depth analysis. So here we go, the Douglas TBD-1 Devastator. The Douglas TBD-1 Devastator was the United States' first monowing carrier aircraft, being ordered to replace the aging T-4M1 Martin in 1934, with its first flight being in 1935, and its official adoption 2 years later in 1937. Now, something must be taken into account when looking at this aircraft, which is the fact that it's a single-engine, carrier-borne, all-metal monowing torpedo bomber in 1937. Other aircraft that were in service in 1937 are as follows. Note that aircraft introduced in 1937 were not counted. America had the Boeing P-26 Peashooter, the first American all-metal fighter plane. France had the Dewoitine D.500, an open-cockpit fixed-geared monoplane, much like the P-26. Germany had the Arata-68, an all-metal biplane built to replace the older Heinkel 51. Russia had the Polikarpov I-15 Bis, a wooden biplane with a radial engine and fixed gear. Great Britain had the Gloster Gladiator, a closed-cockpit biplane with fixed gear. Japan had the Mitsubishi A-5M, the world's first all-metal fighter plane adopted into a military. And last, but actually not least for once, Italy with their Fiat CR.32, which was like many other contemporary fighters of the time being a fixed-geared biplane with an open cockpit. As you can probably tell, many of these aircraft share similar characteristics, that being fixed gear, with the majority of them having open cockpits and biplane configurations. Now, look at the TBD-1, which, keep in mind, first flew in 1935. We see that it has an enclosed canopy, which would become the norm for aircraft produced during and after 1937, an all-metal construction which would become more and more common, but is still rare by 1935 standards, retractable landing gear, which was all but unheard of for 1935, and a monoplane configuration which, while not unheard of for 1935, is still definitely rare. This isn't even including its other features like its powered folding wings, with which the pilot could control. Note that folding wings existed beforehand, but they had to be operated by the ground crew manually. And also its high payload capacity, capable of holding 12 100-pound bombs, 2 500-pound bombs, or one singular 1,000-pound bomb, along with, of course, the Mk14 Torpedo. Yes, that one. For a plane developed in 1934 and flown in 1935, it was significantly ahead of its competition, and after its first flight may have been the most advanced combat aircraft in the world. So why is it not fondly remembered like the British Fairey Swordfish, which is commonly known as a flying bag of strings, which was outdated upon arrival? Well, there are a few reasons for this. First off, when it was developed in 1935 it was cutting edge. In 1937 it was still competitive, but by 1939 it was woefully obsolete, with aircraft like the F-4F Wildcat and SPD Dauntless entering service. And by 1940, it was completely unprepared for World War II, with its once marvelous features like powered folding wings, enclosed canopies, and retractable gear not only common for every aircraft in service, but expected. But how did it go from the bleeding edge of military aviation to the Museum of Archaeology in just 4 years? Well, in the 1930s, technology, especially those regarding military purposes, were developing so fast that you would request a plane to be built, and by the time it was delivered, it was already outdated because of some technology that was finally mastered. For the Devastator specifically, it was engine technology. Because of the limitations of technology from 1935, the Devastator had to account for the fact that it was a big and heavy plane with only a Pratt & Whitney 900 horsepower engine to power it, which, again, for the time, was a monster of an engine. The second reason and third reason are intertwined, however, with the second specifically being its horrific and infamous slaughter at the Battle of Midway, in which they suffered catastrophic casualties, with nothing to show in return. And that was because of reason 3, the Mk14 Torpedo, which I will simply say was a terrible weapon system that should have been fixed before it ever saw widespread adoption. Back to the Devastator, however, its main reason it's not well remembered is that it was a flying coffin during the Battle of Midway, even though when you look outside of that one battle to the rest of its combat record, its only combat losses were at Midway, when it was so out of date that the scout planes launched from battleships posed a legitimate threat to it. The Devastator, however, did fly in other battles, but they are scarcely remembered, and as such don't contribute much to the public notation of the Devastator. Which is tragic, as outside of Midway, the Devastator was a perfect example of the progress of military aviation during its peak in the mid-1930s.